If you were around in late October 2004, you probably remember the exact setup. You'd sit on the floor in front of a heavy CRT television, plug in those red, white, and yellow RCA cables, turn on a PlayStation 2, and listen to that iconic, glassy blue screen startup sound while the disc tray buzzed. If you were lucky, you had an official 8MB Magic Gate memory card sitting in slot 1. And if you didn't have enough space on it, you spent 10 minutes deleting old saved files from Madden or Kingdom Hearts just to make room. Inside that PS2 sat a total of 32 megabytes of system memory. To put that into perspective, a single uncompressed photo taken on a cheap budget phone today uses more memory than the PS2 had to run an entire game. 32 megabytes was barely enough space to hold a few high-resolution textures, a couple of audio files, and basic character models at the same time. Yet, when you put Grand Theft Auto San Andreas into that tray and hit start, you weren't looking at some cramped arcade room or a linear hallway shooter. You were looking at a massive, living, breathing, simulated state. You had 3 distinct cities, Los Santos, San Fierro, and Las Venturas, along with massive mountain ranges, pine forests, dusty farm towns, and miles of desert highway. And once you walked out of CJ's house in Ganton, you could hop on a bicycle and ride across that entire state without seeing a single loading screen. Squeezing a world that big onto hardware that was already straining in 2004 took some incredible engineering tricks. But keeping that game stable on store shelves also meant making a few quiet choices behind the scenes, including leaving a small piece of disabled developer code buried dormant on millions of retail discs. Within 8 months of launch, a single Dutch modder flipped an internal software flag back on, turning the biggest entertainment launch in history into a full-blown national political circus. It pulled the game off store shelves, wiped out tens of millions of dollars in corporate value overnight, and brought federal regulators straight to Rockstar's door. To understand how San Andreas pulled off that technical miracle and why it almost got wiped off the face of the earth, you have to look at the physical brick wall Rockstar ran into back in 2002. Back in October 2002, Rockstar North released Grand Theft Auto Vice City. It was a massive pop culture hit, filled with neon lights, 80s synth pop, and Hawaiian shirts. But if you look closely at how Vice City was actually put together, you can see the exact points where the hardware was screaming for mercy. The game was set in a single, relatively flat city, split down the middle by water. If you grabbed a fast sports car like a Cheetah and slammed on the gas across one of the bridges connecting Vice City Beach to the mainland, the game would routinely freeze mid-drive, slap a white loading box right in the middle of your screen, and pause for 5 seconds while the disk drive struggled to fetch data off the DVD. The PlayStation 2 was a fantastic machine for its time, but its memory budget was brutally tight. It had 32 megabytes of main RAM and 4 megabytes of video memory. When you drove down a street, the console had to hold the road geometry, car physics, pedestrian AI, character models, engine sounds, and radio stations inside that tiny pool of memory, all at the exact same time. Despite hitting those hardware walls on Vice City, Rockstar leadership made a wild decision for their next project. They didn't want to make another single city. They wanted to build an entire state. They sketched out Los Santos based on Los Angeles, San Fierro based on San Francisco, and Las Venturas based on Las Vegas. Then, because that wasn't ambitious enough, they decided to connect those 3 cities with miles of countryside, rivers, farm towns, and desert. Altogether, the map measured around 36 square kilometers. That was roughly 4 times the landmass of Vice City. But the hardware hadn't changed at all. They were trying to build a world 4 times larger on the exact same 32 megabytes of RAM, reading off the exact same slow 4x DVD drive. Lead technical programmer Obi Vermey and his engine team looked at those design goals and knew that if they tried to load this new map using traditional level loading methods, the PS2 would simply run out of memory and crash instantly. To make an entire state actually run on a home console without choking, the engineering team at Rockstar North had to completely rewrite how the game talked to the disk drive. Instead of loading big chunks of the neighborhood into memory and keeping them there, they turned memory management into a real-time streaming operation. They took the 36 square kilometer map and chopped it up into a grid of smaller streaming sectors. Out of the console's 32 megabytes of RAM, the engineers locked away roughly 16 to 20 megabytes strictly for dynamic world streaming. If you played San Andreas on an older PS2, you probably remember the physical noise coming out of the console. You could actually hear the optical laser thrashing back and forth inside the drive, making a frantic click-click sound as it tried to pull in textures and building models fast enough while you sped down the freeway. The disk motor was spinning at maximum speed just to keep up with your driving. The moment an area passed behind your camera angle, the engine deleted it from memory to make room for whatever was coming next. That meant the state of San Andreas never actually existed inside your console at any single moment. The game was only rendering a tiny bubble of reality right around Carl Johnson. If you drove a slow vehicle like a bicycle or a tractor, the streaming engine had plenty of time to work. But if you grabbed a fast sports car like an Infernus or flew a jet across the map, you pushed the drive right to the absolute edge of failure. If the laser lagged for even half a second while reading the spinning DVD, the engine couldn't draw the world in time. You'd watch buildings pop out of thin air, or the road beneath your tires would completely vanish, dropping your car straight into an empty, gray void of death. But when it worked, it felt like black magic, an unbroken world with no loading screens interrupting your drive. Building an engine capable of streaming an entire state was a massive technical accomplishment, but Rockstar still had to figure out how to make players actually care about living inside it. In earlier open-world games, your main character was basically a silent action figure with a gun attached. Claude in GTA 3 didn't speak a single word, and Tommy Vercetti in Vice City was a static action movie archetype who looked and moved the exact same way from the opening cutscene to the end credits. With San Andreas, Rockstar added a layer of personal RPG mechanics that made protagonist Carl C.J. Johnson feel human, flawed, and vulnerable. If you spent hours driving around eating fast food at Cluck & Bell or well-stacked pizza, CJ gained visible weight, lost his sprinting speed, and couldn't vault over tall chain-link fences without gasping for air. If you spent time at the gym lifting weights or swimming off the coast, his muscle mass and stamina stats went up, completely changing his physical character model. Those physical changes rippled through the rest of the game world in funny, embarrassing ways. Non-player characters on the street made fun of your weight or complimented your muscle. Local gang members gave CJ different levels of respect based on his clothing, haircuts, tattoos, and physical shape. If you let CJ get out of shape, your own friends in Grove Street would roast you mercilessly. In older open-world games, once you bought a building or cleared a mission, that part of the map was yours forever. In San Andreas, the world fought back. You could be halfway across the map in a crop duster or gambling at a casino in Las Venturas when your phone rang. It would be Sweet complaining that rival gang members were taking over your territory back in Los Santos, forcing you to drop what you were doing, turn around, and drive back to defend your turf. If you forgot to eat, CJ starved and lost health. The game refused to let you just coast through the map. It made you take care of CJ's life and fight to hold on to what you'd built. Giving players control over CJ's body was only half the equation. The story surrounding him needed a level of grounding that open-world games had never really attempted before. Up to this point, crime games drew their inspiration almost entirely from Hollywood mob movies like Scarface, The Godfather, or Goodfellas. For San Andreas, Rockstar brought in screenwriter and producer DJ Pooh as a co-writer and cultural consultant. Together with lead writer Dan Houser, they set the game in 1992, placing CJ right in the middle of a world shaped by the crack epidemic, neighborhood gang rivalries, corrupt police units, and the social unrest surrounding the LA riots. The way they cast the voice talent showed how serious they were about getting the vibe right. DJ Pooh was talking on the phone with Rockstar executives, while young LA rapper Young Melee happened to be standing in the room. Dan Houser heard Melee talking in the background over the speakerphone, asked who he was, and brought him in to audition. Melee gave CJ a grounded, weary humanity that anchored the whole game. They surrounded him with an incredible voice cast, bringing in Samuel L. Jackson to play the corrupt Officer Tenpenny alongside Ice-T and MC-8. They backed up the world with Radio Los Santos, a radio soundtrack loaded with West Coast hip-hop from Dr. Dre, Tupac, and NWA. The storyline directly tackled the LAPD C-Race corruption scandals of the late 80s and early 90s, turning the main villain into a badge-wearing extortionist who used systemic power to force CJ into doing his dirty work. Rockstar wasn't copying Hollywood mob movies anymore. They put players inside the middle of the LAPD crash scandal, handed them a controller, and made them play through it. When San Andreas launched on October 26, 2004, it shattered every sales metric the video game industry had ever seen. People lined up around the block for midnight releases at GameStop and local game shops, taking time off work and skipping school just to get their hands on a copy. Within days, millions of copies flooded out of stores. It went on to sell 17.33 million units on the PlayStation 2 alone, making it the best-selling game in the entire history of Sony's console, eventually pushing past 27.5 million copies worldwide across all platforms. It was outgrossing major Hollywood blockbusters and setting the tone for mid-2000s youth culture. You couldn't walk into a middle school, a high school, a dorm room, or a music store without hearing people talk about Los Santos, custom lowriders, or radio stations like KDST. But becoming that big meant putting a giant target on its back. By late 2004, video games weren't a quiet, nerdy niche anymore. They were a multi-billion-dollar cultural force. Political figures, cable news commentators, and moral advocacy groups were actively searching for something they could point to as proof that interactive media was ruining society. Rockstar had built the biggest game in the world, but the sheer scale of its success meant that any flaw or exposed vulnerability would be amplified on a national stage. And buried deep inside the computer code of every disc sitting on store shelves, there was a flaw waiting to be found. In June 2005, Rockstar released the PC version of San Andreas. Unlike console discs, PC game files were open to inspection, giving technical enthusiasts and modders direct access to the internal script archives. On June 9, 2005, a 38-year-old Dutch programmer and modder named Patrick Wildenborg, known online as Patrick W., released a tiny script patch called Hot Coffee. Wildenborg hadn't created new animations or coded explicit scenes from scratch. All he did was flip a single internal software flag back on inside the game's script files. During development, Rockstar's animators had built a crude interactive minigame for when CJ went inside a girlfriend's house. Late in production, management decided to cut the feature from the game. In game development, deleting an old file right before sending the master disk to the factory is like yanking a brick out of the middle of a Jenga tower. Even if you think that brick isn't doing anything, touching the compiled code 2 weeks before print means you risk breaking 100 things you can't see. So instead of wiping the assets, developers simply disabled the trigger flag, turning the switch off and locking the door. And let's be clear about what this minigame actually looked like. It wasn't some photorealistic cinematic scene. It was two low-polygon, fully clothed game models awkwardly bouncing around on a virtual bed. But when Wildenborg flipped that switch back on and uploaded the patch, news spread across the internet overnight. Within weeks, the controversy blew past the gaming press and landed directly on cable news and Capitol Hill. On July 14, 2005, Senator Hillary Clinton held a press conference calling for a federal investigation into Rockstar, urging the FTC to step in and proposing legislation that would criminalize selling adult-rated games to minors. 6 days later, on July 20th, the ESRB officially revoked the game's mature rating and slapped it with an adults-only rating. That AO rating was an absolute death sentence for retail distribution because major retailers had strict corporate policies against stocking AO-rated games. On July 21st, store managers at Walmart, Target, Best Buy, and GameStop got corporate notices to clear their shelves immediately. Delivery trucks full of discs literally turned around on highways. Millions of dollars worth of inventory went straight into backroom boxes. Take-Two's manufacturing lines stopped dead, and executives watched tens of millions in valuation vanish in a single trading session. Take-Two Interactive and Rockstar were staring down an absolute corporate nightmare. They were facing class action lawsuits from angry shareholders and consumers, a formal FTC investigation for deceptive marketing, and millions of useless discs stacked high in retail warehouses. Instead of backing down, throwing their developers under the bus, or permanently censoring the narrative world they had built, Rockstar chose to absorb the massive financial hit. They recalled millions of retail discs, taking a direct write-off of over $12 million in inventory replacement and restocking costs, while setting aside another $20.1 million to settle shareholder and consumer class action lawsuits. Their engineering team worked around the clock to create the Cold Coffee v1.01 patch, completely stripping the leftover animation assets off the master files so the game could be repressed, restored to a mature rating, and returned to store shelves. In June 2006, Take-Two finalized a settlement with the FTC, agreeing to strict future content disclosures while avoiding criminal fines or forced creative changes to the game's actual story. San Andreas survived the media circus, went back on store shelves, and continued selling millions of copies around the world. When you step back and look at the whole picture, the reason San Andreas remains such a landmark moment isn't just because of the scandal or the record-breaking sales figures. It was the sheer, unapologetic ambition of what Rockstar attempted to do on hardware that had no business running it. Think about the technical stack for a second. They took a console with 32 megabytes of RAM, a tiny fraction of what modern smartwatches have today, and pushed an optical laser to its absolute physical limits just to stream 3 entire cities, mountain ranges, and desert highways without a single loading screen. They took open-world gaming away from silent arcade figures and Hollywood caricatures, grounding it in 1992 Los Angeles with real human vulnerability, systemic corruption, and a living world that actively fought back against you. And when a hidden piece of cut code triggered the biggest moral panic in video game history, almost tearing the studio down, it ended up proving something even bigger. Video games had become too massive, too culturally influential, and too resilient for the political establishment to simply erase. Every modern open-world game you play today, from GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2 to Cyberpunk, is standing directly on the shoulders of the streaming code, narrative depth, and relentless risk-taking that Obi Vermeil, Dan Houser, DJ Pooh, and the team at Rockstar North packed into that single plastic DVD disc over 20 years ago. It proved that video games didn't have to stay safe, sanitized toys. They could tackle real culture, survive national outrage, and claim their place as a dominant form of modern art. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how San Andreas changed the gaming world forever, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment down below with your favorite memory of playing San Andreas back in the day. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next story.